When non-Christians act more like Christians than Christians do, there's a problem. Next on the Metal Pulpit. Thanks for joining me for another Metal Pulpit. I took a little time off because I needed to rethink a few topics and wanted to really just dive deep on a few good ones here. And if you ever have a question that you'd like me to address as a pastor of a institutional church, which I pastor here in central Wisconsin, email me, pastorbobadams@gmail.com, and I will address them on this podcast in upcoming episodes. So, when non-Christians act more like Christians do, this last week I did a talk on Jonah, and what an interesting story. Jonah disobeyed God, went the other way to a city called Tarshish instead of going to Nineveh, which Nineveh was part of Assyria. Assyria not friends with Israel, and Jonah an Israelite. So God says, hey, take this mess of these people. He said nope, and heads out the other way. What's interesting about this story is he ends up on a boat. On this boat, scripture points out, are full of pagans and heathens. Basically, the boat was full of their livelihood and they were setting sail. Jonah was on the boat, could care less, went down to the bottom of the boat, fell asleep. Meanwhile, a storm comes. People are throwing things overboard. One would assume it's their livelihood. What else would you throw overboard on a loaded ship? So that the boat wouldn't tip during the storm. Meanwhile, they go down and get Jonah, and they realize that he's the problem. They still try to protect him and help him out. But what's interesting about this story is non-Christians were acting more Christian than the Christians. Has this ever happened to you in life before? I'm at an interesting phase in life. There's a point in every person's life where you remember that time when your parents got old. You see, I remember back probably 14 years ago, my dad was a workhorse and still is, but he's 77 now, a polisher for Harley Davidson down in Milwaukee. And they had to move. And I remember just carrying on with the move like no big deal, like we've always done. My parents have never rented, they've always owned. They've always owned but never rented. And we were helping my dad move and my mom, and I see my dad just out of the corner of my eye leaning over his car, and he's crying. A 6'5", almost 300-pound guy crying, and I'm like, this is not normal. And I go over and I'm like, well, Dad, what's going on? What happened? And he goes, I just can't do what I used to do. Well, fast forward a few years, and this weekend we ended up moving my mom from a hospital to a nursing home for rehab services. But nonetheless, she's not a most physically fit lady, and more and more, this phase of life is becoming a reality for her. If you knew all the ailments she's going through, and we're doing our best not to let it happen. But what's interesting about this whole thing is, I've had a lot of Christians say, praying for you. Thanks. In Scripture, when somebody needed a lot of help, desperate times and all of this, you never heard anybody say, let me pray for you. I'll pray for you. They just did it. Number one, they did pray for you, which is very easy to say, I'll pray for you and not pray for you, especially in an age of social networking. But number two, they stepped in. They helped out. You know, as a pastor, we don't get a lot of invites from people that say, I just want to get together with pastor and see how they're doing. So I would encourage you, email, write. If you have a pastor locally, take them out to eat. Pastor Bob Beeman, Pastor Chris, Pastor Craig, all these guys, send them a word of encouragement, because they are all going through things as well, just as much as you are. But it's funny how we always call them pastors and want to bear our burdens on them, which is fine, which is totally fine. But once in a while, it's nice to get that call saying, how you doing? What can I do for you? That happened to me in this case. Have a lot of people that were saying, praying for you, we're praying for you, sorry to hear that. It was the non-Christians that stepped in and said, I will take your kids so you can go see your mom. I will watch your kids so you can go see your mom. I have a friend down in Milwaukee that has been my friend for 38 years, not a Christian. Awesome guy though. He goes, what can I do for your mom? I will drive over there and visit with her, take her, whatever you need. You say the word and I'll be there. It's kind of disturbing. It's kind of a letdown, actually, a sad state of Christianity when we rely on the "I'll pray for you" mentality rather than stepping in and saying, "You know what? I heard you're going through a hard time. Let me take you and your family out for dinner tonight. Let me provide you with something." Or just saying, "You know what? Let me watch your kids so you and your wife can have a date night. Let me watch your kids so, and if you're a single pastor, let me watch your kids so you can go out." Or if you have no kids, just, "What can I do for you?" You see, we have to be careful as Christians not to become so wrapped up in the "I'll pray for you" thing, but rather step up and do something. Help somebody out. When somebody's going through a financial crisis, the last thing they want to hear, and probably would receive a punch in the mouth, is, "I'll pray for you." No, they need a check for $20. They need help now. They don't need a Dave Ramsey course. That could come down the road, I guess, if they're not managing well, but step in and do something, because the world is full of do-nothing Christians, and Christians need to do something. Shoot me your thoughts, PastorBobAdams@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.